In 1938, an English town was convinced a man with a razor was hunting people in the streets. Women were afraid to go out alone. Vigilante groups started searching for him. Innocent men were attacked, and eventually, Scotland Yard was called in. But then, the investigation took a very strange turn. Some of the supposed victims started admitting that no one had attacked them at all. They had injured themselves. And within days, police were asking a question nobody had expected. Had the Halifax Slasher ever existed? Welcome back to Her Strange Hour. I'm Ivy Monroe, and this is our series, Bizarre Lunchtime Tales. These are strange little stories you can watch while you're on a quick break. So let's get right into today's story, the bizarre panic surrounding the Halifax Slasher. Halifax, England, in 1938 was a busy industrial town in West Yorkshire, and in November of that year, people were already a little on edge. A few reports of violence against women had been circulating in the area. Then, on November 21st, a woman named Mary Sutcliffe was walking home after finishing her shift at a local toffee factory. Mary said a man approached her near her home and suddenly raised his hand as though he was about to strike her. She lifted her arm to protect herself, and she was injured. At first, this looked like exactly what it probably should have looked like. One woman had been attacked by one man. Terrible, but isolated. Except it didn't stay isolated for very long. Within days, other people began coming forward. They had stories too. Someone had been approached in the dark. Someone had been struck. Someone had been cut. And the attacker described in these stories slowly became one person in the public imagination. A mysterious man roaming Halifax with a razor or knife. The newspapers gave him a name, the Halifax Slasher. And once he had a name, people started seeing him everywhere. On November 25th, a man named Percy Waddington appeared at someone's home with a deep wound across the back of his hand. It was bad enough that he needed stitches. Percy said someone had slashed him. He claimed he hadn't gotten a good look at the attacker, but he had something that seemed like evidence. A small piece of fabric. Percy said he must have torn it from the attacker's raincoat while defending himself. Now police weren't just dealing with frightened rumors. They had an injured man. They had what appeared to be physical evidence. And reports were still coming in. The fear spread fast. People began organizing themselves into groups and patrolling the streets, which, as you can probably imagine, created a whole new problem. Because now you had frightened people walking around Halifax looking at every unfamiliar man and wondering, is that him? At one point, a local man named Clifford Edwards found himself accused of being the slasher after he had actually gone to help following another reported attack. A crowd gathered. The situation became so serious that police had to protect him. That is how quickly suspicion had taken over. You didn't need evidence anymore. Looking suspicious to the wrong group of frightened people could be enough. And it wasn't only Halifax. Reports of similar attacks started appearing elsewhere. Manchester, Bradford, other communities across northern England. By late November, police were dealing with a story that seemed to be growing faster than they could investigate it. Contemporary newspapers reported that detectives from several police forces became involved. Eventually, Scotland Yard was called in. And that's when the story started falling apart. Because investigators began looking more closely at the injuries, the timelines, the descriptions, the evidence. And some of it just wasn't making sense. Then, Percy Waddington confessed. Remember the man with the injured hand? The one who claimed he'd pulled a piece from his attacker's raincoat? Police discovered something rather inconvenient. The raincoat belonged to Percy. He had injured his own hand. He had created the evidence. And he admitted that his story wasn't true. Percy reportedly told investigators that all the talk about the attacks had been on his mind. But his confession didn't explain why other people were reporting the same thing. until more stories began unraveling. One woman admitted that injuries she had blamed on the slasher were actually made with broken glass. Another reportedly bought a razor blade and created an attack story herself. Outside Halifax, investigators were finding the same pattern. A teenage boy who said he'd been slashed admitted that he had cut himself with a safety razor. A woman in Manchester admitted her injuries were self-inflicted. And in another case, a woman who claimed a man had attacked her eventually told police she had been reading so much about the slasher that the idea had basically taken over her thoughts. She had injured herself with a knife. This wasn't one person copying another person's exact story. Different people seem to have had different reasons. Some may have wanted attention. Some were dealing with personal problems. Some may have gotten swept up in the fear around them. And some couldn't really explain why they had done it at all. But every new report made the imaginary attacker feel more real. And the more real he felt, the easier it became for another person to believe that their strange encounter, scratch, noise in the dark, or fear walking home might be connected to him. Then another newspaper headline appeared. Then another rumor. Then another person went looking for the man everyone was talking about. It fed itself. And the people caught in the middle of this weren't imaginary. The mobs were real. People really were frightened. Innocent men really were confronted because someone thought they looked suspicious. Businesses were disrupted. Police spent thousands of hours chasing leads. One contemporary report described more than 2,000 police hours being spent investigating incidents in the wider area, all while officers were searching for a criminal who appeared to change depending on who was describing him. Eventually, police publicly tried to calm the situation. The idea of one razor-wielding madman responsible for all of these attacks had collapsed. There was no evidence of a single Halifax slasher roaming the streets. And almost as quickly as the panic had grown, it faded. But there's one detail that keeps this from having a perfectly neat ending. Mary Sutcliffe, the woman whose attack helped start the scare. Contemporary reporting said Scotland Yard still believed that Mary had genuinely been attacked, possibly twice. So it's possible that somewhere underneath all of the fake reports, misunderstandings, and self-inflicted injuries, there really was an assault, just not the mythical criminal the town eventually created around it. And I think that makes this story even more unsettling. Because the strangest part of the Halifax Slasher isn't really the mystery of who he was. It's watching how quickly people can build something together without realizing they're doing it. One frightening story becomes two. Two become five. Newspapers give the threat a name. People start watching for him. Someone sees a stranger in the dark. Someone else creates an attack of their own. And suddenly, an entire town is hunting a man who may never have existed in the first place. The Halifax Slasher didn't need to be standing in an alley with a razor. By the end of November 1938, Halifax had created him for itself. And that is today's Bizarre Lunchtime Tale. If you enjoyed spending your break with me, make sure you subscribe to Her Strange Hour, because I have plenty more strange stories. Also, check out the entire Bizarre Lunchtime Tales playlist for more bite-sized stories to listen to when you have a quick break. And if you like longer stories, check out my Her Strange Hour podcast playlist. This is Ivy Monroe, and I'll see you soon.